Shit. RIP. Oh shit. All right, we're done with this shit. R.I.P. Harambe. It's tight. It's dope. Save that shit. Okay. Okay, today we're reviewing the Commander deck, Lacrimosa de Sila. That's Latin. It is basically a Commander deck based around the Commander Horobi, Death Wail, aka Harambe, Death's Hug, R.I.P. Harambe. Give me 1 second here and then. Yeah. Okay, so basically, I am building the deck I'm rebuilding this deck just for fun. This isn't for competitive play, but I haven't played Magic in a long time, and I figured. So I played, geez, way back, late 90s. I started playing during Ice Age. When I was fairly young, I got instantaneously hooked on it. Played fairly competitively in DCI tournaments up until Kamigawa Black, and then stopped. And then recently discovered that the majority of our company, in software development company I work for, plays Magic the Gathering, and typically, when we have team meetings or whatever, coincidentally on Friday evening, so Friday night, Magic, we kind of bringing it back, and we've been playing a lot of Commander, so I thought I'd kind of give it a shot and build my own Commander deck. So after doing some research, I wanted to do one that was just fun to play with and fun to play against, while still being, decent enough to win. But the primary goal is to have fun and change up the game. However, I think the appeal of this deck is that it kind of forces you to rethink your interactions, your card interactions, and reprioritize what you want to do with your turn. So it revolves around the premise of this idea that we're going to call him Harambe from now on. Horobi, aka Harambe. When you get Harambe out, whenever a creature becomes a target of a spell or ability, destroy that creature. So this changes things up. This basically paired up, at least with this kind of assembly of cards, which I've spent a bunch of time going through and actually gathering these cards, but I also have a few alterations to make, very basic things that I'll acquire. But the core combo or combos revolving this would be things like Harambe with things like let's see, what do we have? We have instants. We have Harambe and Touch of Darkness. Touch of Darkness reads, changes the color of one or more target creatures to black until end of turn. Your choice which and how many creatures are affected. Costs to tap, maintain, or use special abilities of targets. Creatures remain entirely unchanged. Basically, you're just changing any target creatures to black. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Almost had a sneeze there. But this comboed with Harambe, we can essentially just destroy, assassinate, and spot remove any creatures that we want to for 1 mana as an instant. Super fantastic. And so you basically get, things that basic artifacts in your deck, like Baton of Morale. I mean, target creature gains banding until end of turn. You target these creatures, and for 2 colorless mana, you got yourself a death stick, right? Batoning things to death, which is absolutely why I like this specific build. Obviously, there are a lot of variations of this Horobi commander deck, using things like Icy Manipulator to target. Let me see if they have that artifact in here. They do not, but an alternative would be Squeeze Toy. Tap it to prevent a damage to any creature, so when you target a creature, boom, it destroys it. So you have, not only does it combo well, but just the overall synergy of cards, like, Trader of Get. If a non-token creature would die, exile that card and put a zombie token. So this is for spot removal, not only to remove them from graveyard play, but you're also generating tokens, generating creatures that, will require some attention of your opponents. Not only that, but you have a lot of mana acceleration, things like Magus of the Coffers, but you also have, let me see, we also have, I know there's another, let's go down this list here. We have Ashling the Extinguisher. This will force your opponent to constantly sack a creature, perhaps. And you know, this is 4/4/4/4, and it doesn't immediately seem awesome, but one of the weaknesses of this deck is dealing with things that are indestructible. So really you're forcing that player to sacrifice it, and you have ways to make it unblockable or to give it fear. One of those ways that will kind of combo off or work really well together would be things like Dothy Embrace, giving your creature shadow. You also have things like Rogue's Passage to make target creature unblockable. You know, target legendary creature gains fear until end of turn. So this is a legendary creature. You give it fear, and you know, or whatever, or a shadow, or making it just strictly unblockable in general. And you force that player to sacrifice this indestructible creature. That's very valuable, but it's just a synergy that works fairly well. Blood Artist, obviously whenever another creature dies, you can essentially leech life off of any player, not necessarily that creature's controller, but any player. This synergizes obviously really well with any time you're just popping creatures off with Horobi. Just another source of life gain. Here you have some graveyard play, so you have options, right? You can actually reanimate creature cards in any graveyard and put them back into control under your control, as long as he stays in play, obviously. But this is great because this allows you to take advantage of, you know, your opponent's graveyards. Crypt Gas, again, mana acceleration with Extort doesn't hurt either. Not only are you getting extra mana when you tap it, but you also can activate a life leech anytime you cast a spell, which is awesome. Erebos, this prevents your opponents from gaining life, but more importantly, this is indestructible, and as long as your devotion to black is less than 5, it isn't a creature. So just the fact that you can also pay life to draw cards is valuable, just because you know, giving you card advantage for life. But with you gaining life from various sources, it's extremely valuable to be able to do that. Continue drawing the cards that you need, but for a fairly, you know, uncapped draw, that's really good. I really like that. The stats for the mana you're able to get out is awesome as well. You have Grey Merchant of Asphodel. This is going to be your primary life leech, because when he comes into play, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. So I mean, this with, let's just assume I only have Horobi and Grey Merchant, that's already 4 devotion to black, each mana symbol in the permanents that I control. Now if you look at a lot of the artifacts or enchantments, I'm sorry, you can see that, you know, this one has 2, Dothy Embrace has 1, Glistening Oil is 2, you know, I have things like Cuskin Falls, Necropotence, that's 3. So you can imagine, once we actually plan it out and time it out right, you know, you could potentially have, you know, 4, 5, 6 or more, and you're draining 6 or more, 6+ life from each opponent. And if you're playing in a pot of, you know, 3 opponents, there you go, 18 life you just gained, which obviously makes you a target then. But there's easy ways you can essentially get rid of your own Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and then you'd be able to reanimate them with various effects to kind of trigger this Merchant of Asphodel multiple times. So you know, your goal is to obviously set that up. You have creatures like Harvesters of Souls. This is Death Touch, but you also, whenever a non-token creature dies, I may draw a card. So this, you know, allows me to kind of generate a draw engine for when I have my Horobi out and I'm able to just ping things down. That's extremely helpful, right? Hex Parasite, now this is essentially just pay 2 life and start pinging things off the board if you don't have the black mana for it. But really, pay 1 black mana, remove 0 counters, and just the fact that you're targeting things just allows you to ping them for 1 black or 2 life, whichever one you prefer. Just the fact that you're targeting them with Harambe is awesome. You have Kalidas, Trader of Get. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile that card and put it into, put a black zombie token into play. This is awesome. With lifelink as well. And I can sacrifice it to put a couple of counters on him. Magus of the Coffers. Here we are increasing mana once again. And this is just a mana generator, a mana accelerator for any of our large how do I say, what word am I looking for? Burst spell. Necrotic Ooze. As long as Necrotic Ooze is on the battlefield, it has all activated abilities of all creatures in all graveyards. Very, very interesting. Activated abilities. So, I mean, you look at the activated abilities that we have. Right? Tap to produce mana. So you have options with Necrotic Ooze. That's a pretty interesting card. You have Ob Nixilis Unshackled. You know, 6 mana for a 4/4 trample. Stats aren't amazing, but whenever an opponent searches a library, they lose 10 life. So this is really kind of cutting down on potential answers, maybe, or when another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on Ob Nixilis. This is just an option if you have somebody constantly digging in their deck. Which would be, I mean, could be useful to have. The fact that he can just continue growing when creatures die is pretty cool. I have alternatives for him. You know, swapping things out. I'm trying to dig through my cards. I'm pretty sure I had a Hypnotic Spectre I want to kind of throw in here. And then there are other cards too that I have that I could potentially throw in. Runescar Demon is pretty cool. Basically, you know, it's a tutor. When it comes into play, I search my deck for a card, put it in my hand. But it's a 6/6 flying body for 7. Hopefully with mana acceleration, the high casting cost isn't too much of an issue. But we have Shieldred, Whispering One. We have Swamp Walk, and in the beginning of my upkeep, return target creature card from my graveyard to the battlefield. And this is awesome if we're able to constantly ping things off. But not only that, if we're able to kind of cycle this with Grey Merchants of Asphodel, drain everybody's life, and then, you know, gain life this way. This is amazing. And then if I stick something like Lightning Greaves on her, which I have sideboarded or potentially thinking about inserting here, I'm able to give her essentially hexproof, and give her haste if I need, but just a big body with Swamp Walk, or that reanimates my creatures and allows me to continually potentially cycle out Grey Merchant of Asphodel to trigger the ability. So I believe, let me see, what does Grey Merchant? It says when it enters the battlefield. Yep, when it enters the battlefield, it triggers. So that's really, really cool. Undertaker, discard a card, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Once again, this allows me to cycle out and return creature cards from my graveyard to play, assuming that my opponents don't have like graveyard removal or very consistent graveyard removal. That's awesome. Until your next upkeep, target non-creature artifact is an artifact with power and toughness equal to its total casting costs. So Xenic Poltergeist allows me to take out artifacts that my opponents control, since black doesn't have a very good consistent method of destroying artifacts. This is helpful because you can turn it into a creature and then use Horobi's effect to essentially ping it down, right? So there's that. Well, again, we went to the baton. The baton is just a death stick for when we have Horobi out. Cage Sun, Mana Accelerator, Cauldron of Souls. This is awesome. I mean, for 5 mana and you're tapping it, you can target as many creatures as you want to, and it's basically just, you know, a complete the wipe of whatever creatures you want. We have Sentinel Flute, you know, to trigger and activate and dig for the card pieces that I need. Things like, you know, the Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and then of course getting shielded. That's awesome. Expedition Map. Now, this is searching my library for any specific card. Generally, you want to just go ahead and dig your Cabal Coffers out to get that giant mana acceleration out. Glaring Spotlight allows us to get rid of Hexproof, because typically Hexproof and Indestructible are two of our biggest weaknesses, or Shroud, but Glaring Spotlight gets rid of that. We also have a land that'll take care of that too, and we'll take a look at that in a second. Jet Medallion, obviously for cost reduction. Mimic Vat is fantastic because we can imprint a non-token creature from the battlefield. I can exile it, and if I do, return each other creature exiled with Mimic Vault to its owner's graveyard. So really, you can only imprint one creature at a time, and I can put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of the exiled card. So it gains haste, exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So really what you want to do with Mimic Vat, if you get this combo piece, is you want to cast Mimic Vat, and then you want to drop down your Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and then really what you're doing is you trigger off the Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and then you can ping it to get rid of it, and then once you get rid of it and it imprints onto my Mimic Vat, I create a token, a copy, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of the exiled card, but the effect triggers, so when it enters the battlefield, I gain the Life Leech effect again, not Life Leech, but you know what I mean, the Drain Life effect, and then you can continually do that over and over, essentially each turn, just continuously draining your opponents down. And so that's typically how you win the game, by just, you know, draining down your opponents all at once. First time you do it, I imagine you'll be a pretty big target, so you'll want to be very aware of that. So obviously you want to try to get as much removal as you can when it comes to that. You know, I do have things like, I wanted to get Damnation in here as an option, which is the Black Wrath of God essentially, but you know, eventually replace Diabolic Tutor with, if I can dig out my Vampiric Tutor or my Demonic Tutor, that would be awesome. But I have other options in here that I may replace. So things like Choice of Damnations, it's an interesting card, but I don't know that, you know, this is kind of a fun factor card. Beseech the Queen is pretty good. Search your library for a card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands I control. So really for 3 black, I can search my library for, you know, a converted mana cost with at least 3 or less. So if I needed to Beseech the Queen and search my deck, really I'm searching for things like Mimic Vat and things like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, you know, for 5 or whatever. And then do I need to reveal it? Reveal it, yep, put it in my hand. So that's kind of a good way to kind of get a few combo pieces out. Decree or Dark Petition, search my library for a card, put that in my hand, shuffle my library. If there are 2 or more instants or sorceries in my graveyard, it costs 3 essentially. I can add 3 black, so it'll essentially only cost 2. So this is kind of a tutor essentially effect. I have a few of those that will allow me to generate or search for cards that I need. Yep. Target opponent puts the cards from his or her hand on top of his or her library. Search that player's library for that many cards. The player puts those cards into his or her hand, then shuffles his or her library. So swapping out an opponent's hand, and you get to choose them new cards for their new hand. That's extremely valuable. That's extremely valuable and can ruin a card. Can ruin a combo deck's chances of winning if you know they're playing a combo deck just by disrupting their pieces. So very cool, very fun card to play. And we kind of skipped, as you know, what do we skipped around. We skipped Whip of Erebos, giving my creatures lifelink. Pretty cool, but really returning target creature card from a graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So if it would be leave the battlefield, exile it instead. So this is a reanimation trigger if I need it, but really, I mean, you're triggering off things like perhaps Runescarred Demon to search for combo pieces. If it's in your graveyard for whatever reason, and you're able to get it in the graveyard with various discards or enchantments that you have. So there's a lot of sub synergies that we'll have to get used to, but let's go over the lands, because there are a lot of different lands. Arcane Lighthouse will remove Hexproof and Shroud. Awesome. This is getting exile all cards in target player's graveyard, so this is to make sure that an animator deck doesn't get a chance to take advantage of that. Bachuga Bog here, I'm sorry, we went through that. Cabal Coffers, obviously, for the obvious, add 1 black for each swamp you control. Close Ghost Quarter, destroy target land and replace it with a basic land, basically, or I can add 1. This is really good for removing your opponent's lands that have special abilities. You know, a non-basic land ideally, but it really doesn't specify. You can really destroy any land. So it's just land removal when you need it, if you need it. Lake of the Dead is really cool. You can sacrifice a swamp to add 4 black. Once again, mana acceleration at this point. Mortuary Mire comes in the battlefield. I can put a creature card from my graveyard on top of my library. Comes into play tapped, and tap it to add 1 black. So really this is just returning from my grave. Grave manipulation synergizes fairly well with a lot of the creatures that I have. Let's see. Choose a color, add mana, the amount of mana equal to the devotion of that color. Once again, able to choose black, and then here I'm able to produce, you know, an increasing amount of black mana. Rogue's Passage, making a creature unblockable. This goes really well with Phage the Untouchable. You know, you can insta-give somebody with Phage if you need to. I don't know how feasible this is going to be for me to cast it from my hand and keep her alive. I mean, if I do have things like, I plan on perhaps putting in a Lightning Greaves, that could be extremely beneficial. Yep,